everyone, and thank you very much for coming out tonight to Highland Park's first ever open public meeting to discuss the hiring of our new police chief. I've seen some of you at some of our previous meetings, and I see a bunch of new faces here again tonight. And since we're here talking about the police, I just wanted to take a moment to send our wishes for health and wellness to two of our police officers who were injured last weekend, saving a resident from a fire that was at Montgomery Apartments. They actually had to bang down the door and drag them out, and both of them were treated at St. Peter's for smoke inhalation and some other things, but they're all out of the hospital and they're doing well. So I think, a big thank you goes out to officers Elena Giles and Joseph O'Lara. So the last meeting we had at council where we discussed the police chief position was a bit, shall we say, contentious. Some people, I think, left the meeting feeling like they weren't being heard. And I've been spending a lot of time since then thinking about that. And that's the reason why we're all here tonight. I want to hear what you have to say about what is important to you in the police chief that will be coming into Highland Park. And I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your questions, but I also want to hear what those questions are leading to in your minds about the type of person or some of the things about the position that you think are important. No matter who gets elected in this process, I want you all to know that I will be working very closely with the new chief to ensure that we have a well-articulated program of professional development. That's very important to me and the rest of the council members as well. And speaking of having that professional development and the input from you, I want to introduce you tonight to some of the members of our new, soon-to-be-called Highland Park Equity Commission. These are a bunch of residents who have come to some of the meetings we've had to discuss the police here in Highland Park, and they have been working very closely with myself, Councilman Matt Hale, who is the liaison to this committee back there, the Human Relations Commission, and Councilwoman Elsie Foster Dublin in the process as we move forward. So tonight you're going to hear from Justin, who is the chair of the commission, I should say. You'll be hearing from the borough's labor attorney, Art Thibault, who is going to talk us through the whole process and the legalities involved. And at this point, I would like to turn this over to Justin Burton. Please.
So, hi, welcome. Thanks for coming out. And thanks to... yeah, there's like so many phones up here.
Welcome to my life.
I'd like to say thanks to the mayor and to the attorney and to the borough council people who were able to come out tonight, and especially to you for coming out on a rainy, kind of cold, but not that cold for February. Whatever, you came out. Thank you. So I'm going to pass off to Lucinda in just a moment to kind of run through tonight's specific agenda. But before we do that, as the mayor was just saying, we're a new commission, the Highland Park Equity Commission. As of just about a month ago, we were approved by the council to exist. So it seems worthwhile to take a moment and explain why this commission exists and what the role of the commission will be kind of moving forward. And most of it comes down, I think, to the definition of the word equity. Many of you here probably already have a really good sense of what this is. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, one of the big things with equity is defining it against the word equality, right? So equality would be treating everybody the same, which is pretty cool on an individual level, right? Like if individually we're treated the same by everybody, most of us walk away feeling pretty good, right? as long as we're all treated well instead of just like, that's the such point. Equity is a deeper, more nuanced, more complex idea that usually has to do with like systems and institutions and governments, which is what we're doing here. The idea of equity is actually that it's not appropriate to treat everybody the same way, because not everybody starts at the same place. One of my students today had a really great example of this, which was if I assign a reading and say it's due tomorrow, that's fine for several people, but it may not at all be appropriate for the student with, say, dyslexia who needs an extra day to finish the reading, right? And so it's equal to say everybody turn this in tomorrow, but it's not at all equitable to do that. And so we need to accommodate for folks who are starting from different places. Specifically, what our commission is going to be most interested in are people who start from different places because of the history and present day conditions that marginalize or exclude or oppress or even kill people because they belong to groups that have been historically oppressed. And so we're thinking about racial discrimination, gender discrimination, sex discrimination, ability discrimination, religious discrimination, these sorts of ideas. And doing this work at the systemic or institutional level can be really tricky because oftentimes our governments have been set up for a very long time, and the old way of doing things is a bad way of doing things, right? Or a discriminatory way of doing things. And so even as we elect people who want to make change for good or change for the better, we elect them into these systems that have been for a long time written, or have been for a long time set up to marginalize certain groups of people. And so what we need are like a constant kind of eye on what it is to create equitable policies, equitable processes, things that make sure that not only is everybody being treated individually equally, but more so that systems and governments are treating people in a way where we all have equal access and opportunity. Right? So this commission specifically is going to exist to work with different departments across the borough, with the borough administrator and heads of different departments, to focus very narrowly on one question, which is, are we being as equitable as possible? And where we're not, we will advise different ways to push things forward. And where we are, we will encourage to continue doing that equitable thing. Tonight specifically, we're going to be thinking about policing. This is a really wonderful opportunity for the community to get together and think, what do we want in our police force? What do we want from the person who leads our police force? And we're going to split up into groups later on and kind of talk that through on a more granular level. But in all, what we're thinking here is policing and equity together, right? How do we combine policing with equitable practices? So I'm going to hand things to Lucinda, who will walk us through tonight's agenda in more specifics. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Lucinda Holt, and again, it is great to see so many people out.
Speak up a little bit.
Sure. On a rainy night, is that better? Is this
That microphone, you have to, there's a button on it.
You have to slide it up.
Slide it up
This
to,
button?
nope,
The one I slid up?
the one that says get it to red.
Is that better? Okay, I'm going to speak loudly, and you will work on the mic. All right. So my name is Lucinda Holt, and I'm just going to walk through what we're going to be doing this evening. So the purpose of this forum is really to get your input. We want to hear from you about the sorts of questions and issues we should be bringing into the process of interviewing for the new.
Thank you so much. As we interview for the new police chief. So how we're going to start is, we mentioned that the attorney for the borough is here. He's actually going to walk us through the process for hiring a new chief so that we know what that process looks like. This meeting is not an opportunity to ask, to say, oh, we should be doing it differently, because this process is actually state mandated, and he's going to walk us through that. Once that's happened, you'll be able to ask questions about the process, just so we have some clarity about what goes into hiring the new police chief. Once that's done, our friend Justin here will be sharing with us 4 topic areas. Topic areas where we'll be able to generate questions. You'll be broken into groups. You can choose which group you want to go into, and we'll generate questions for the interview process. Once that's done, we'll all report back. Each group will report back the questions they came up with. And then at the end of this whole process, we will take all of those questions and kind of distill them. If you have signed the sign-in sheet that was outside with your name, your email address, we'll be able to let you know where we are in the process, like what questions have we distilled these down to and what the next steps are, okay? So that's what we're gonna do tonight. That will be the focus of tonight, really generating those questions that will be used in the interview process for the incoming, for the candidates who are applying to be police chief, right? So I'm going to invite the attorney up, if you could come up, Mr. I don't want to mispronounce your name. Thibault? Thibault.
I actually think it's better without the microphone.
Yeah.
It's harder to hear with the microphone.
I talk loud, so if you can't hear me, I'll raise my voice. So I want to walk through the process of how the borough is going to select its next chief of police. The promotional process is set forth in policy. There are essentially 3 phases to the process. Your officers who are eligible are currently studying, and the process is about ready to get underway. The first phase of that process is an oral examination. That oral examination is performed by the State Chiefs of Police organization. They will have 3 members. All 4 candidates for the position will be given the same questions, obviously at different times, but they'll be in the same question. They will be graded pursuant to a matrix that the State Chiefs create. They're looking for certain answers, they're looking for certain things that the officers are going to tell them about various topics that the borough has had some input on and the State Chiefs will have input on. Legal issues, constitutional issues, police procedures issues, arrest, search and seizure, things along those lines. So those are questions that are going to be asked. There's that oral portion. The officers are graded, and then they're moved forward so long as those officers have achieved a passing score of 70% or better. If they do, then they are provided with essentially the written examination portion of the examination. There's 10 written questions that they're provided. Again, there's a matrix system developed by the State Chiefs of Police. They're the ones developing these questions with input from the borough to have some locality in the questions, but there are 10 questions. They all get the same. They will have time to answer those questions. It's not sit in the room and answer the question at a desk. They'll have some time to take those questions home, prepare their essays. They will be submitted then to the State Chiefs of Police. Those questions and answers will be graded and the scores tabulated. The third phase of the testing process is just a simple objective view of seniority. Right? It's required by law, required by statute to consider a candidate's seniority, that is length of service in the police department. There's a matrix set up. It's a maximum of 5 points, 5% of the score is the seniority piece. So those are tabulated, and then the candidates are ranked. Those candidates, the way the policy was drafted, so I'm only backtrack a little bit, we had 8 eligible candidates. So the officers had to have supervisory experience, sergeant and above, to be eligible for police chief. All right? They had to serve in the position of sergeant for at least 1 year and had to have been employed by the borough for at least 3 years. Anybody who was a sergeant or already met that standard, but nonetheless, they had to be a sergeant for 12 months prior to the testing announcement. Of those 8, only 4 submitted letters of interest to move forward in the promotional process for chief. When we had, again, initially envisioned this process, we were hopeful that all 8 would put in for it, that all 8 would be part of the process. We have 4 candidates, and so long as all 4 pass the process, get through all the examinations, the mayor and public safety committee will then interview those 4 candidates. The process was set up that the top 4 candidates would be interviewed for essentially 2 slots, the chief of police and the captain of police. Now we have 4 candidates for the same remaining slots. But in any case, so the candidates will move forward then to the interview process before the mayor and public safety committee. And my understanding is that's kind of where now your role comes in as to the types of questions, the areas of concern to you that you'd like to see the mayor and council put forth to those candidates who have then gotten to the mayor and public safety committee interview process. So that's it necessarily for the promotional process. Anybody have any questions about what I did?
Yeah, 2 questions. The first is, at the last meeting I was at, unless I missed something, it was presented that the borough was going to be hiring an acting chief, not a chief, and that there'd be a one-year
Right, so-
process. Let me just finish.
Well, I know where you're going to go, but go ahead.
That there'd be a one-year process, and at the end of that process, Elsie at the meeting said if the borough was not satisfied with the performance of the acting chief, that the borough could consider another option, perhaps a police director, rather than actually hiring a permanent police chief. So that's my first question. The second question is, you talked about an interview process, you know, the ranked order, the oral interview, the written interview, where people get a score from the Police Chiefs Association. Then you mentioned something about an interview from borough officials. How is the final determination made? In other words, what is the role of the police chief's evaluation process in the final decision? If someone ranks highest in that, this is not like a civil service where there's a rule of 3. If someone ranks highest in the oral and the written and comes out on top, can they still not be selected by the borough in this process that's envisioned, where there will be questions that come out of a group like tonight?
Yes. So to answer your last first, yes. So we would we are utilizing a single process that civil service has, which is Rule 3. So any lawyer who practices public sector labor law understands that in civil service jurisdictions, which Highland Park is not, a governing body has a right, an public employer has a right to select any one of the top 3 candidates in a promotional process. And they use their discretion weighing various things. Here, where you have 4, then the public employer has a right to select 2 of the top 4, because when you select 1, then there'd be 3 left, and the process would continue to repeat itself. So to your point, yes, we have discretion through the role of the mayor and council now, which is now more focused on items that are important to Highland Park. They can exercise their discretion and decide that maybe the best test taker is not the best candidate when the mayor and council are now involved in that process. So yes, they have that discretion. And the first point that you had made was about the acting chief. So he's acting, I view it as a probationary period for 1 year, both for the chief of police position and for the captain of police position, during which period of time the chief will be mentored by someone from the state chiefs of police organization. They will be evaluated by that mentor, also evaluated by the borough during that period of time. And at the end of that 12-month period, you're correct, the borough has the right to, at that point, either return the officer to the position from which they came, promote them permanently, make them the permanent chief, and if a demotion is in play, then the borough would have to kind of reshuffle the cards and reassess and determine, where do they go from here, and one of them may be a director. I was looking that way, sorry. Go ahead.
So first of all, is this process of having the acting chief and acting captain, is that something that the borough has employed in the past, or is this the first time using that process?
I believe it, I've been here 12 years or so as labor counsel, so I believe that it's the first time that they've ever done the acting position in that 12-year period of time.
And then at the end of the year, when they'll be evaluated, you said by the borough, will it be a role, a community role, perhaps from the Equity Commission of Equity in that evaluation as well?
In what way?
In terms of having a community response, this new commission is supposed to be about evaluating equitable practices from the police and the borough. At least in my opinion, I think that they should have a role in evaluating the new chief and captain and equitable practices.
Well, that's kind of outside the scope of what I would do. That's more of a question for the mayor and council.
Yes.
There are certain, just so you know, there are certain things that the public would not be privy to, which would be employee personnel issues and evaluations and discipline and things like that. But I will answer your question this way. If the public had some contact, and we hope that our chief has a lot of public contact. We want our new chief to be out there in the public, meeting with the public. There are towns that have, it's like cops and coffee and chiefs, where they meet with members of the public and they talk with the community. So we would want our chief to be out there. So if the community says our chief is insular, we never see our chief, he's not out there, she's not out there, we'd want to hear that. So I think the mayor and council will do that, and whether they take that into account, that's something that they can answer.
My first question, I have two questions. My first question is, what role will we have as concerned residents if you're going to take our questions and use those? I guess this is really a question for the mayor and the council, but how do you intend to report back to the community based on those questions? So are you going to have someone from the Equity Commission on the interview process, the final interview? If not, do you intend to hold a community forum and report to us back on how these candidates answered these questions?
So I'm going to turn part of that answer over to Justin, because he and I were actually talking about it today. And also to the attorney. Because of some state statute, we can't have a resident or a non-elected official involved in the actual asking of the questions. But Justin has a plan for getting input back and forth between residents and the commission.
Oh, I do. I don't. I plan for the commission to talk this through and figure out some mechanism. So, like you, I would prefer that someone from the commission could sit in on the interview process. If that's not legal, then I guess I don't want to break the law.
So, Ira, do you really want me to give you the statute?
Yeah. It doesn't allow for input from the.
No, you're asking this about the interview, where I'm interviewing candidates, right? So during this, so let me be clear. So, Ira, he may not know me, but I know. So, in any case, so in a police chief interview, any promotional interview for a police chief, police captain, whatever, there are certain sensitive information that's clearly going to come up, right? There's going to be personnel information that's going to come up, prior discipline that's going to come up. There's going to be internal affairs issues that are going to come up. There's going to be stuff about police procedures that are not permitted to be disclosed to the public. The statute on internal affairs, IRA 4814-181, the Oprah statute precludes the disclosure to the public of issues regarding employee evaluations, employee discipline, things of that nature. So those things are going to come up. Okay, so I can't advise the borough to say a member of the public can sit in on that interview with an employee whose disciplinary record may come up, or performance issues may come up, or internal affairs issues may come up on allegations. Because anytime somebody makes an allegation against a police officer, right, wrong, or indifferent, that officer is subject to an internal affairs investigation. And that information is confidential by law. Okay, the Attorney General's issued guidelines on internal affairs. That statute I cited, 181, says that every police department must adopt internal affairs guidelines consistent with what the AG said. Okay, statute, it's law. So I can't disclose that information. It's clearly going to come up potentially. I don't know the 4 candidates, frankly, off the top of my head. I don't know who they are. I don't know if they have a disciplinary record. I don't know what their performance is, and I don't know if they've been subject to internal affairs investigations. And I certainly can't anticipate whether there's going to be some police practice or procedures that may arise, such as like minimum manning maybe, things like that we wouldn't want out in the public about how our police officers patrol and what they do, and maybe the ideas that our chiefs have. So I would advise the borough that a member of the public shouldn't be there. That's my advice.
I have a second question.
You got a second?
I understand that when hiring a police chief, you need to hire from within. I understand that. But I also understand that under New Jersey state law, a municipality has several options with respect to supervision of the police force. And so I'm curious as to why this council didn't explore other options, considering some of the concerns we've had recently in the past year, and for many years actually, related to the concerns that have been raised. So why wasn't a police director, why wasn't hiring a police director considered? Because you can hire a police director from without.
For sure. Yeah, no, absolutely can. My opinion, I'm not on the governing body, so I can't make that decision. If they ask me, here's what I would say. You have a small police force. You put a director in place, you lose a gun on the street. Police director can't act as a police officer. He's a civilian. He's no different than me, than you, and than anyone else in this room, unless there's police officers in this room. So in a small police department, it's difficult to put a director in place instead of a chief, because you lose an officer on the street. You know, a police chief is still a police officer. He can still enforce the law, he can make arrests, he can stop cars. So that may have been one of the points And that would have been certainly one of my things to consider to the mayor and council, and say, this is what you need to consider. If you go the director route, and that's still a possibility, we talked about that, that at the end of the process, this may not work as far as having a police chief, and maybe they have to consider the director, but then another consideration is, I have someone who's running the department who can't be a police officer.
I would hope our next chief is not just a gun on the street.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you
actually
very much.
sounds like a good thing.
Yeah, that's
Once you work
a,
on the street,
I'll
that's
call
a
it
good
that.
thing.
Any questions?
For the seniority part, does that include, like, say somebody was a police officer, somebody else, and then came here, does that part of their career transfer in for the seniority, or is it
It's
just their
senior-
time
it's
in
senior-
Highland
it's
Park?
senior to the Highland Park.
I have like a two-part question. Am I to understand that the questions that are developed tonight will not come into play until the council and mayor does their part interview?
That's right.
Okay, now out of those questions, in the event the questions that are generated by this community, I'm assuming that's probably gonna be the meat of what your questions will be. If you have a candidate that does not meet the satisfaction of the majority of these questions that come out, are you forced to take somebody off this list, or at that point, can you go outside and start this process all over?
We're not bound to anything. If mayor and council decide that none of the candidates are qualified, or none of the candidates are eligible, then I can't make a chief, I can't go outside to make a police chief, but I can then consider the director piece.
Okay.
Yes.
That kind of answers my question. And my question was if only one of the candidates make it through the first part of the process,
Right.
and we required to hire them, then the answer, you already did.
This is a logistic question. So I guess I'm curious as to if we're creating the questions and then it's given to elected officials to ask the candidates, what then is the sort of general expected timeline for feedback from the elected officials on those candidates? Because that would be where the community could potentially have input. But I don't necessarily know, like, are we creating a rubric to judge the, like, sound worthiness of their responses? Like, who is going to judge whether or not their responses are satisfactory, and is that open to community input? Is there time for that in this process?
Well, my understanding was that you were going to put forth questions that, and topics or areas that you thought important that should be asked of the candidates. I agree with you, there has to be a rubric, there has to be a matrix as to the appropriate answer. Asking a question without what you're looking for, the appropriate answer, doesn't do a whole lot of good. But that's a...
So if I could just, can I just add to that, that part of what we're hoping to do tonight is the questions, and that's the primary goal, is to get the questions that you want to ask of these candidates. But in addition to that, we'd also like to get a sense of what is the best answer to some of those questions, right? So we'd like to get your thoughts about, you pose a question, how would you see a great chief responding to these questions? So our goal in our sessions up here is to not only come up with the questions, but also to tell us, what are you looking for in this particular chief? And as Mr. Tebow said, that the probationary period that will be for a year also comes with particular benchmarks, and rubrics for that year that the chief and the captain will be measured against, and those will be developed by the council, by the mayor, and by the HP Equity Committee. And so the benchmarks that we are in a sense grading them over the probationary year, that's another place for input from the community. So it's not just the questions, that's a big part of it, because we really do need those questions. But it's also tell us what you would like some of those answers to be.
So can we get an answer
that we also don't see tonight as being just kind of like we're here together and what we do tonight, it ends here. And that's why I was, for those of you that were here at the beginning, I was saying that it's really important that we have your email address, because we do want this to be a continued dialogue. And not just only to be able to share with you kind of as the information is distilled, questions are distilled, but as we also kind of come up with a rubric of how we think this should, the ideal candidate would respond. So just to ease your mind that it's not that we have to, like, if you come up with an idea 3 days from now, we do have an email address now, the Highland Park Equity Commission, and you're welcome to reach out to us and share those ideas. I don't think anyone has.
Okay, so our email address, so you know, you want to write this down, equitycommissionhp@gmail.com, right?
Yes.
Cool. equitycommissionhp@gmail.com. I'll tell you again at the end. Please contact us. Like the commission sees itself as like a direct voice to the government, and we would like you, go talk to the government also, right? But if you would like to talk with other people who are thinking about some of the same things that you are, please contact us and we will funnel that information and talk back to you and work with you. Like, we don't assume that we can do any of this work, just however many of us, and we need your help.
Please repeat that address.
The email address is equitycommissionhp@gmail.com.
And the question that somebody asked before about the plan and that I was referencing was the discussion we had earlier, that the plan is to get input on a regular basis from you to the commission, so the commission can then advise us on what is happening and also give you feedback.
You go first.
Just a very specific question. Who makes the final decision? You kind of alluded to it, the mayor and council, but then you said that you would take it under advisement. Is it you? Is it them?
I'm not the process at all.
Okay, so
Yeah, so
mayor,
it's
you
ma-
make the final decision with council?
Mayor and council.
Mayor and council.
Okay.
Yes.
So you said that the process is basically statutory, that's kind of set in.
No, it's a-
So as far as the has to be internal, the
It has to be internal,
exams.
and I have to consider their seniority. Right?
Gotcha.
So I have to promote from within, and I have to consider their seniority.
So the part with the mentor during the probationary period, is that statutory?
It is not.
Okay, and then the second thing related to that with the interview, where it's possible that confidential information or information that shouldn't be public can come up. In lots of different venues where you have someone answering questions, you'll have a public and a private session, and there'll be the public question will say, I can't answer that in public, we can address that in a closed door session. Would it be possible to have something like that for this interview process?
And that's not for the mayor and council to decide to the extent that they.
Would it be possible to have something like that for this interview
So
process?
that's something I would want to talk with the council about.
I don't want to speak for the mayor, but what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of interest about after the questions are asked and how that process goes, how the response goes back and forth.
I think some
Right.
of it has to do with just wanting to know that the questions are being asked
And
and hearing the responses.
And hearing them,
Yeah.
that's what I inarticulately was trying to say, is that yes, we were trying to figure out that there's a lot of interest in making sure that the questions that we come up with tonight, the answers that are given are communicated to the community. The community knows what the answers are. And what I can say, I think, for both of us is that we're committed with this commission to making sure that that process goes on as all the way through. How that goes on, I can't give you an answer right now, and I would like to, because we just don't know the answer to that, in part because of some of the legal ramifications. But I can say that I think that we're committed to having that.
Just a
certification process.
very brief follow-up, would it be illegal to split it up like that into two sessions?
I don't know, and here's, the objection that we might have might come from the union.
The objection, sorry.
Is it something you can look into?
So let me
That you guys can look into? You can't answer right now.
Who cares what you So
I just say that aloud, but you.
I just lost my track, but,
Look into having a public private.
yeah,
Right,
so
obviously you
let's.
can't answer right now.
Right,
You
we
guys
can't
look into
answer
it.
that. We know that, there may be some issues legally or with the union, and that could wind up being legal. So let us go back. We're hearing what you're saying. Let us go back and investigate that, and we'll let you know in some way, shape, or form how that works out, probably through these guys. Yes.
In the very least, if there are no union or legal ramifications, can you commit to saying yes? If there are no legal or union ramifications to doing a split interview?
Well, I don't know if the split is the way to do it. If there are no union or legal ramifications, I don't want to commit 100% to the split if there's a better way. That's all I'm saying.
Can you commit to having members of the community involved in that process?
In what process?
In the interview process, of that final interview, if there's no legal or...
Well, what I can commit to is working to get to that. I don't know, you know, if you would consider the union eventually a legal matter. I can't answer that without having all of the information. What we can commit to, and what we have said from the beginning of this meeting, is we want to hear you and we want to respond. But sometimes we can't respond on the right here and now because of all the stuff that Art is talking about.
You can do that.
Yeah, I certainly think that we can get back to you all on issues like this. If I could just remind everybody that it's 8:10, and I know these are important issues, but I do think maybe if we wanted to break up into the groups to do the questioning, is that, you know, I don't. It seems to me that we or we could stay later.
We're going to come back together again.
At the end.
We will come back together again. How about we take 2 more questions and then we move to the topic breakout.
I have suggestion, please. I am immigrant, but I am living here 18 years. And my language very, very poor. I apologize for that. But I have a lot of problem in Highland Park. First of all, we not in safety. And you don't need my explanation about police for important in our every minute, in every hours. I have good example from police. I don't know this person here or not. One person, he helped me, and it is so shame for me, I don't know his name. He helped me when nobody not helped me. 11 o'clock, I live in Woodbridge Avenue, where is Morgan Properties. I have Section 8 program. And 11 o'clock, all the time, water go up, and I call to person, and nobody not help me. 1 hour, more than 1 hour, I'm running, and nobody not help. And after 12, I call to police, and one person coming and call and coming somebody and stop this water. But I was very, very sick. And this person called to emergency and sent me to hospital, Robert Wood Johnson. I don't know his name. It is shame for me. But I would like same person have to be your advisor, all because he knows our life. And this property, Morgan property, broke all the time rules, like all landlords. They send people with big dogs. Every, because for money, only for money. And one family from Indians, C10, I was living in C15, they moved because all dogs, it is, we afraid, and day and night they barking. And when we call to management, to police, nobody not paying attention.
So you
We wasn't in safety. This family, they working here in Highland Park.
So
Yes.
here's how we can help you.
Yes,
Okay.
but now it is big problem.
Okay, so
You have to, police have to make sign, mark, public way, not for dogs,
So
not for bicycle.
Okay, listen to me.
Yes.
We want
I
to help
have-
we want to help you in your situation. My assistant is here. If you can give him your contact information, we have a housing department that works with landlords when there's a problem. So if you can give Harry your information, we will help you with that.
Main Street, parking, bicycle, dogs, and we cannot walk.
Yeah, so
Yes.
talk to Harry.
We not in safety. All the time I told, why? It is big, big dogs. You let them go where it is.
Harry, maybe you can go up
Yes.
there and help her out. I think you have one more question.
Over the middle.
Thank you. Seeing as all four candidates are already members of our police department, members of our community, and how well they communicate with the community is going to be important as chief. Could we ask them to come to a meeting like this and answer questions from the public so you can see how they interact with the public? In addition to the
Yes, that's one of the
process?
things that we've done in the past. We haven't done it in 2 years, but we do have open public meetings on an issue with the police. So a
On
couple
the
of years.
specific issue of hiring, go up there and say why you want to be chief and
Oh,
take
that kind of
questions.
thing? Yeah, that's different.
That's different.
Voluntarily.
No, I understand that, but you change the process now.
Yeah.
I'm saying, can we do that in addition to the process? So
But
that
that-
council
but it-
could also see how they interact with the public.
Yeah, it's too late for us now to stop the process and start all over, so we can't do that, but I do want to address the actual concern that came up about the interview process that Jessica, you raised, and somebody over there raised. I don't remember. Okay, so those are your two
Quick
questions.
question, sorry, follow up. Why is it too late? Where are we in the process? Maybe I missed that, but
No, we've already advised all of our officers what the process is. We've already started down that road. So we told them, these are the steps of the process. So now we're going to add now another layer to them saying, you're going to come.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Well, the process isn't statutory, though. It's in
No,
there if you
no,
want.
but, you know, this meeting, I want to pick up from where we are and fix what we can from this point forward. Not change the process, because we would have to go back to the drawing boards if anything changes, because there may be other people, maybe one of these four won't want to go through a different process. You know, it's just, right now, it's not a good time for us to stop and start all over. The current chief retires in April. We need to have something in place. One of the things I was going to ask Art to talk a little bit more about is the role of this outside mentor. The mentor that's going to be working with whoever the selected acting captain and acting chief turn out to be. The mentor is someone who's a seasoned police chief who has experience, but also is someone that we meaning, I guess, the mayor and council get to select after interviewing them. So certainly we're going to want to have a mentor that is the kind of person that we would want teaching our prospective or acting chief or captain what we want to do, how we want to do things. And I don't know, but maybe we can make the mentor part of this whole thing more public.
Right. So I did reach out to the chief that's been advised in the mayor and council, and he's the one who has helped develop the mentor program. I worked with the state chiefs. He's an ex-president of state chiefs. He's a seasoned expert in police procedures, and so found by courts of law in the state of New Jersey. And, you know, he might be a perfect candidate to be the mentor. He has said that he was going to be considered. The point is that you will have a seasoned chief of police who will mentor your new or soon-to-be new chief. The chief will work with him, be on-site, also off-site. Will have the availability to that individual 24/7 with questions and problems. And then and the chief's going to be in and evaluating and reporting back to the mayor and the borough administrator as to how the chief and captain are doing throughout the process.
I know that we're going on, but I do think that it's worth saying that those qualities that you're saying, like seasoned, like a lot, we're interested in other qualities besides that. We're interested in mentors who have an understanding of implicit bias, who have an understanding of what it means to use de-escalation strategies. That is what matters to many of us in this room. Right. And so I want to make sure that that is a part of the mentorship. It's not just experience.
Okay,
Yeah, but that also matters to us.
I think you're sensing a lot of frustration, and the reason is it seems like you're looking for reasons to say no instead of reasons to say yes
I think
to public input.
Okay, so I don't want to give that impression, okay?
That's the impression you give.
Okay. Well, I don't want to give that impression. I don't think any of us want to give that impression, okay? What I do want to do is do this in a legal fashion and figure out, and you know, I want these guys that are on this commission to help and guide us in this process and be a conduit of questions and information from the public, from the residents, to us. We need their guidance and input. I just said to Justin, I don't want to take over your meeting, and I kind of feel like I am. But I'm jumping up because he can't answer some of these questions.
This is the Q&A part. This is your...
Sit back and enjoy yourself. So I don't want to say no to everything, but the process we're at a certain point in the process. I'm sorry. If we had started having these conversations 6 months ago, we're not in the same kind of way. I can't change history. I cannot change history, but I can work with you guys to try to move forward in a way that works for all of us, for us too. I don't want legal suits. That's, you know, that's cost the taxpayers an incredible amount of money. So just one second, I see you jumping out of your seat there. So I want to, the guys and it's all guys, 4 guys that are interviewing, they have been studying, they paid for courses to study, they are doing their orals when?
I'm not sure, sometime this week.
Okay, so their orals, you know, that's what they're preparing for first. I happen to believe, and I know it's going to be hard for you to believe this because of, you know, things that you've been talking about. I think we have some good potential candidates there. I wouldn't rule out anybody internal at this point. We have an option to rule them out if they don't pass or if they don't give us the right answers. I want you to help us understand what those answers should be. And the only way we can start doing that is starting with the questions, which is what those tables are set up for in the back. We are going to come back here after you guys go to different tables and go through all of the questions that came up. But more importantly, more important than the questions is really going to be what you want as answers to those questions. Okay?
So, just really quickly, because you shouldn't be defensive. Nobody's trying to change something that happened 6 months, 9 months ago. We know we can't change the process and add a new interview process because that would require starting the whole thing all over again. But I think what you need to hear is it's not just the questions coming out of this group, but it's the answers.
That's exactly
People
what I'm
want
saying.
not just, and what I talked about at the last meeting was transparency.
Right.
And the key to transparency is to have either this group or people from that commission there, not just to give you input on the questions, but to hear the answers,
Right.
so that the community is assured that their questions are being answered in the way that the community wants to
Absolutely,
hear.
and that's what, I'm going to rely on this commission and the attorney to work with us on how we can make that happen in a legal fashion that is not going to be, something that we trip on top of each other, that kind of thing.
So this is the part of the meeting where we take all of our energy and focus it on some specific topics. I think one of the main takeaways from just now is that we've got a few more things to think about with like how to go from what we produced tonight to using what we produced tonight to actually generate good, transparent, community-involved processes. And that's something that we'll be talking about for sure and bringing it back to mayor and council liaison. Okay? And we want to hear more from you. That Kermit the Frog those emails to us, right? Just like banging those typewriters.
That's my name.
That's good. It's a good meme.
Do we get to know all the, I mean, I know, not everybody introduced themselves.
Right, so our commission is composed, our council liaison is Matt Hale, as we mentioned. Councilor Kermit, if you don't want to say like your words, or you just want me to say your name?
So I'm Kermit Moss. I'm the meme drinking coffee and tea, right? But so I co-pastor Trinity United Methodist Church in Highland Park with my wife, Pastor Antoinette.
Lucinda Holt. That's it.
He's also the vice chair.
Vice Chair Sonia Hedwell. Matt Hirsch. Sonia and Matt also come to us from the Human Relations Commission, so we've got some overlap with that part of the stuff.
And can I just?
Oh, yeah, you do too.
Can I just add, just like to contribute to this conversation that is going on right now. I know a lot of the faces in the audience, but a lot of the faces are unfamiliar to me. And I just want to make sure that it's clear that, I can only speak for myself, but I think that there are a lot of us that are on this commission that used to be sitting exactly where you are. This is a very recent thing for me to be sitting on this side. And I want to assure you that I have no interest in politics. I have no interest I am here because I believe this is important work. What you are saying is of great concern, and we take it seriously. And that is our role here tonight, is to hear that and be that voice that's going to be ringing in the mayor and council's ear, saying, we need transparency. We need to come back to the community. How are we going to make this happen? That's why I'm up here. So I want to make sure that it's clear to you all that we hear what you're saying, and we are going to be working hard to make sure that that happens within the confines of the process as it is, okay? So of course we're all hearing the mayor, the attorney say that this is what it is. We realize that. But we also know that we have to push and we have to fight for, progress. And that is what all of us on this commission are here to do.
Our other members, Julie Luck serves as the commission secretary, and Sheila Zakar isn't able to be here tonight because she's not well. But we are the commission members. Please, again, contact us, equitycommissionhp@gmail.com. Also, we're like in town. You can just run us down the street and start telling us things, and we'll do our best to answer. Not
Wave at us.
Say hello. So we're about to break into 4 topic groups. Are y'all going to be where these are, or you're going to?
Yeah, maybe we can do it first.
Okay, yeah. So again, the goal here is partly to come up with some questions that we want to ask, partly to come up with like some kind of rubric of how we would prefer those questions to be answered, or what a good answer to those questions would be. or maybe just somewhere in between that, right? So we have these topics. What are we looking for in a police chief? What would a police chief believe about these things or do about these things that we want to hear back from them about, okay? So we have one topic, this will be led by Lucinda, has to do with internal management and discipline philosophy. Hi, Lucinda. Another topic has to do with external communication responsibilities. How does the police chief communicate with the public? Another topic has to do with experience in new forms of police tactics. He'll be chatting with Matt Hirsch about that one. And the fourth one has to do with benchmarks and progress. How do we determine whether or not the police chief is hitting the marks that we're asking for here? If we're creating rubrics that have to do with equity and equitable practices, how do we decide that the police chief, is doing a good job at that or not? That will be the benchmarks and progress group. Sonia Hedlund will be chatting with you there. So very quickly before you move, here's how this works. We're going to spend about 20 minutes chatting in these groups. So feel that clock, but know that you've got time to talk, okay? Once we do that, we're going to come back to where we are and do a quick readout, a few minutes from each group of what you talked about to share with the rest of the group. We're probably not going to open up to a full discussion at that point, but this is where we'll funnel this stuff, bring it down and boil it down into communication with you and continue the ongoing process of talking, okay? So, find your group. I'm going to ask the discussion leaders to kind of just distill what you talked about. This will be a brief summary. It's late, so we're not going to open up another discussion right now. Let me reiterate that we are not the council. We are an amplifier for your voice, okay? So yell into us and we'll yell it also. That's the commission's role here, okay? And so we're going to draw this meeting to a close by explaining, by sharing what each group talked about, but this is not the end of our conversation about this at all, or about equity in general, okay? Email us. Talk to us, send us your concerns, send us your questions. We are going to take this information that's being summarized right now and as much as possible, word for word, transmit it to you via email. So if you've given us your email, we'll get it to you. We'll try to get it up on Facebook. The commission hasn't been approved for their own page yet. We might be able to be approved soon, or else ask the council to post this information on their Facebook page to make this as public as possible. As you see the information that's coming from other groups, and as you have questions or thoughts about them, send that information our way. Send those thoughts and those questions our way. We're not here to apologize or explain what's going on with the council. We're here to hear you and relay that information onto them, okay? So send that to us. Sonia, you want to?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think my group, we were talking about benchmarks and progress, and I think that immediately as we sat down, we came to the conclusion that we don't want to feed to the candidates what we're expecting of them. Right. We actually would like to have a general question posed to the candidates where we can gauge how much are they in alignment with what our expectations are, what our benchmarks are, what progress we want to see in our community policing. So I think that that's the general kind of point about our question, is that we want it to be very open and broad so that we can hear kind of unsolicited, version of what their vision is of policing in Highland Park. That said, we focused then on what we would want to see in those responses. It was pointed out that a lot of it is kind of some of the, what are the tabs on and the other topics around the room, but kind of the main points were centered around racial profiling, racial disparities, collection of data, making sure that progress is being looked at, and making sure that communication with the community remains strong and is very engaged and transparent. And various kind of, I should have brought my notes up with me, but various issues kind of related to those areas, but we also want to make sure that, you know, they have in mind the importance of keeping track of what's going on in terms of, you know, with religion, with gender, sexuality as well in our neighborhood, making sure that our police chief is even thinking of these issues and is in alignment with kind of how, in general, our community seems to think and feel. So did I capture most of that? Does anyone want to?
Model programs. Model programs.
Model programs, yes, exactly. Anything else anyone want to throw out there that I'm missing? No? Yeah, so that was our.
Matt, you seem to be close by.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Thank you, and thanks for coming out, everybody. This is a really important forum and something that I've personally never participated in. So this is a first for me too, to actually provide feedback as a resident. Our topic was experience in new forms of police tactics. So we discussed de-escalation tactics, racial and cultural sensitivity, inclusion training, and implicit bias training. We also talked about how police would respond to special needs, to our special needs community, and if they will maintain a special, and how they will interact with our special needs registry. We also talked about immigration enforcement and how our new chief will interpret certain mandates, or how they will actually just engage with our immigration community. You may notice that you know, one thing that I notice, and that I often notice at a lot of public forums, is that, you know, you don't have a group that is necessarily representative of the entire community. So the police, however, are going to see will be seeing the entire community. And so how they interact with certain segments of our population is going to be very important. We also, you know, we didn't want to lead the witness, but we also, but you know, we do want to know more about the, you know, this is not necessarily questions for the candidates, but we want to know more about the mentorship organization. Currently it's the Police Chiefs Association, which would be the organization if we were not here, but we have other options. So who's actually doing the mentoring? Somebody from a different school of thought, someone who approaches policing in a different way will be important. We talked about a lot. I'm leaving stuff out. Anybody want to chime in?
Well, just that we said we wanted a written out plan of how they would implement de-escalation, implicit bias trainings, and all these different strategies, so that at the end of the 1-year period, you can refer back to that exact document and compare as to what promises they've actually achieved. And having that process of what they plan to do and the benchmarks for how they've achieved that be transparent to the community.
And do you want to summarize what you said? I think your point was really good.
We also talked about that it's not just about attending a one-stop training, but actually thinking through, how do I check up on the practice happening, and if there are, let's say there's an event where there's a crisis intervention, that a police chief engages in kind of a reflective debrief process to say what went well, what went wrong, how do we improve, but then that cycle of inquiry is built in to try to check whether, I mean, to use the terminology, whether these, you know, there's a fidelity of implementation of this type of programming. So we're interested in, I think, someone who has that kind of critical mindedness, who's interested in improvement and setting up kind of speed bumps along the way, so to speak, to check if these actual, you know, trainings are being put into practice, and if not, how to readjust.
Excellent. Yeah, I thought that was a really good point. And then we had We had a good question about data and policing, which I think was mentioned, but use of predictive data, if that's something that is going to be a thing in the future of law enforcement, and what a candidate would think about that, because obviously predictive data can be incredibly biased if applied equally instead of equitably. I think and so a really good point was engagement with our youth community. Beyond the outreach that's happening now. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, just how, as a department, the philosophy would be in terms of approaching interactions with juveniles versus adults, and how they would kind of have a system of how to de-escalate specifically in instances of juveniles and treat them differently than adults.
And there was also a question about firearms in schools.
Oh, yeah. Well, so Officer Joe, who's is the kind of youth liaison, comes to school, and every time he comes to the school, he has a gun, which it makes students incredibly uncomfortable and really sets up a negative, first interaction during formative part of people's the youth's lives, in terms of like police engagement, of us immediately associating a gun with a police officer when he's supposed to be there to build bridges and interact with the youth. So that'd definitely be something I think I could speak for a lot of the students that we'd be looking to not have in the future, and ways of preventing that from happening, basically.
Yeah, we don't want just another gun on the street. To quote. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Sonia, reprise.
Yeah, reprise, that's right. Just something that came to mind. We also talked about just asking a question such as, and it wasn't like it had to be this, but something general like, what's your understanding of implicit bias? Like, can all of the candidates just tell us what their knowledge is of implicit bias? And then there was another great question, which was, what's your understanding of racial profiling? Because I think we all know that that's something that in our community has been particularly painful, like a lack of acknowledgement of racial profiling existing. And so if we could start from at this point saying, do you acknowledge that racial profiling even exists? Can you speak on that? I think is also, I'm seeing a lot of heads nod, so I think those were really good questions.
And I just was going to say, I think that's a really good strategy. I feel like some of the questions that I had written up were probably really targeted, but maybe they can be finessed into being more open to capture some of what we have in those questions, but not feeding, like you're saying. So I just want to say that probably you'll find a lot of those kind of questions, and then you can work with them.
Good.
Yeah, but I think those more detailed questions can be follow-up questions to those more detailed questions.
That's true.
So I'm going to get into those more detailed questions. So our topic was internal management and discipline philosophy. So I'm just going to go through the questions, and some of them get into the weeds. Okay. So what processes and protocols do you plan to put into place to regularly analyze data for racial disparities? There's a lot of talk of data in our group, because if you're going to be managing people, disciplining them, what are you going to use to determine who needs disciplining, who needs to be recognized, right? How will this data inform training and policing practices? How would you plan to comply with the AG's immigration directive? Sorry, let me just keep going. Based on your experience in the department, what changes do you see need to be made in terms of training officers? How do you plan to use the data to inform training? How would you get community feedback beyond coffee with the cops, which is related to this next group that we're going to talk about? Transparency. What are the consequences for an officer who makes racist or sexist comments online? Would you be amenable to having a civilian advisory board? And the group agreed that the answer would be yes to that question. How will you ensure training is effective? And I have more questions here, almost through. How do you see yourself ensuring discipline within your ranks? What's your approach to discipline? Would you say your style is to instruct and train or something else? How would you ensure there is anonymity in the complaint process? How do you monitor officers' performance or even know if there's a discipline issue? How does the Highland Park Police Department currently monitor performance? What are some indicators or metrics that you would use to determine that disciplinary action was necessary? What is the current disciplinary process? Which supervising officers are responsible for disciplinary action? And how would you change Highland Park Police Department's current process for monitoring, recognizing, or disciplining officers? And can you give us an example of when you had to discipline another officer, what did or did not work about that process? That's it.
So our group dealt with external communication, and within our group, our questions were centered, they were descriptive questions. And so we would like those individuals to describe, for instance, how have they, or what would they do to use external communication to de-escalate situations. Number two, how do they communicate with community when police or policing, they've made mistakes? How do they communicate? Three is a question of access. So what are their 3 paradigms or models that they're going to use to build community with the public, but in addition to collaborate with the public? For instance, are they going to be accessible via office hours where community can go there? Will there be email or some type of email that's set up? Will there be a series of public forums with this new police chief and community? So these are paradigmic questions that we want to be able to see, what do you, not only do you agree, but how do you agree, so we can begin to review that. In addition, there are questions regarding access. How would this new police chief and police department be able to communicate their message and their policing kind of trajectory to non-English speaking constituents within our community? That's a very, very important question. And then it's the question of experience. Do they have experience either working with external communication? If you don't have experience, you can't answer the question. This is the bottom line. Number two, what will be in terms of their access to media? Whether that's newspapers in town, whether that's other newspapers or individuals who are in media, will they give access to be able to be interviewed, just to see what are you doing? You know, and then union contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's just the transparency. Are you going to be transparent in your communication in terms of with conduct, with statistics, et cetera, et cetera? And if not, then we have a grave problem. That's our group. One person in our group that wants to put forth something.
I think there was also a question of that we'd like the police officers to share their experience in trying to give examples of their own personal experience trying to de-escalate a situation. And what experience do they have with dealing with something where they're questioned without getting so reactive that we can't really approach them? What experiences do they have with that?
Thanks. Thanks for coming. Thanks for participating. Thanks for the questions, for the information. As I said, we're going to take all this information, push it back to you, ask for some feedback, and continue working to boil this down to something that we hand over to the council. At the same time, we're going to be working with the council to make sure that we get information back from them about how all these questions and answers that we want for these questions are being used in the process, to make this as transparent and two-way street as possible. Have a good night. Thanks so much.
Thank you.